Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, we have been assured for months and years that soft on crime policies are a good thing for cities across the U.S. We'll get into some interesting reporting coming out of North Carolina coming up. And a good Thursday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand by checking out the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app. You can also listen to the program online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning, as always, is brought to you by Melissa Gott and the team over at the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal challenges, reach out to them at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. North Carolina, back in August of 2025, in the summer of last year, was at the top of the national conversation. And the reason that the state of North Carolina was put in that position was because of the brutal, horrific murder of Irina Zarutska, the 23-year-old who was a Ukrainian immigrant who had come to the United States, fleeing her war-torn country, was looking for some level of safety, security, and prosperity, which you can't, of course, fault anybody for wanting that. She comes to the United States legally through an immigration program, is becoming and is actively a useful, productive member of society. She's working a job at a local pizza shop in Charlotte. From reports, she was going through the process of learning everything she needed to get a driver's license, going through the process as you would expect and hope somebody would that's coming to the United States. Well, in late August of last year, her life was ripped away from her. She was minding her own business after work, getting on the Charlotte public transit system, the Charlotte Light Rail, as you're now very familiar with, minding her own business, getting home from work, when she was brutally attacked and killed by DeCarlos Brown Jr. Now, let me make sure I state this point clearly. We have a legal system that is innocent until proven guilty. Absolutely. I'm not sitting here and trying to pretend that that is not the case. However, there is surveillance footage and video that was released by CATS, which is the Charlotte Area Transportation System, the group responsible for operating the light rail, that came out in the days following the brutal murder, that shows very clearly that DeCarlos Brown Jr., who was a serial criminal, it very clearly showed him taking a knife out of his pocket and stabbing Irina Zarutska in the neck at least 2 or 3 times, leaving her for dead on the Charlotte Light Rail, while a bunch of people sat around her and didn't do anything to try and give her any aid or help her with anything. And so North Carolina was thrust into the national conversation late August, early September of last year. Comments from President Donald Trump in the immediate aftermath of that. It, for a couple of days, was the top story on all of the major cable news networks. Even MSNBC and CNN were covering it because the video, which I'm not going to play for you, but we've all seen it at this point. You wish you could unsee it, but the video, the screenshots that you have seen, the horrifying look on Irina's face when she is trying to come to terms with what the hell has just happened as she is stabbed in the neck with earphones in, minding her own business, thrust North Carolina into this national conversation over soft on crime policies. Because DeCarlos Brown Jr., the individual seen in the video stabbing and killing Irina, was a very well-known person to law enforcement in Charlotte. He had had multiple run-ins, multiple convictions, multiple jail stays within Charlotte in Mecklenburg County. This guy was known to authorities. Yet somehow, having just had a run-in with law enforcement earlier in 2025, he was once again out on the streets. And it really kind of captivated national audiences over the discussion on soft on crime policies. Because that's what leads to this stuff. When you have dangerous criminals, and in the case of DeCarlos Brown Jr., the suggestions and pretty clear evidence that he suffers from severe mental illness, some severe mental issues. I don't remember if it's schizophrenia or something like that, but he's got some serious mental problems. Instead of that being dealt with, the judicial system and the court system just allowed him back out on the streets, knowing damn well that he was not mentally of stable mind, that he was an individual that could be prone to doing something like this. Now, did anybody assume that he would commit such a horrific act? Probably not, but the door was open for that when you've got somebody that is very well known by law enforcement and unfortunately has a track record of having a severe mental problem. You could see something like this potentially happening, and unfortunately it did. And a poor innocent girl from Ukraine is the victim of this horrific attack, this horrific tragedy. She, as I mentioned, is doing everything right. Going through, we talk a lot about immigration here on the program, illegal immigration. She's doesn't fit the bill of any of that at all. Assimilating to the United States, working a job, going through the process of getting a driver's license, doing everything that you would hope somebody that's coming to the United States would do. And for that, her life is stripped away from her for absolutely no reason whatsoever. No reason. These two individuals, Irina and Brown, had never had any run-ins before. They were not familiar to each other. This was the unfortunate reality of literally being in the wrong place at the wrong time. She just happened to sit in front of him on the Charlotte Lynx blue line, and that was the end of her life. I mean, it's just a miserable, miserable situation. And we've got a great comment coming in about bringing back mental institutions. And, you go back 50 or 60 years when the Democrat Party and these bleeding heart liberals continued to rally against mental hospitals and mental institutions as, oh, these things are so inhumane. How dare you hold people? How dare you do this? How dare you do that? They're all gone. They don't exist anymore. In an attempt to be friendly and nice and be a good liberal, we shut all of these facilities down over the last couple of decades. We've completely eradicated them from society. And so now we're in this position where there's nothing to do with individuals that fit this bill. Individuals that have problems, very clearly well-defined problems. And what is the solution? Incarcerate them forever? Well, until they commit such an atrocious act like we saw against Irina Zarutska, there's no real justification to do that, and it's not legal to do so. So they eventually just roam the streets until they commit some horrific act that puts them behind bars likely for the rest of their life, which is what we will probably see as the legal proceedings play out for DeCarlos Brown Jr., unless a court finds that he's mentally incapable of standing trial, which, if I was his defense attorneys, that's the argument I'd be making. Here's all the evidence. Here's the backstory. Here's the track record with this guy. He's not competent enough to stand trial. And if that's the case, and I'm not indicating that's exactly what's going to happen, it's a possibility. But if that ends up being the case, then it only builds this argument stronger. If he is mentally incapable of standing trial and defending himself, then why was he out on the streets? There was reporting in the immediate aftermath that his family attempted to do what is called an involuntary, essentially incarceration of him because of some of these severe mental issues. His own mother told that to local news in Charlotte, local media in Charlotte, and a judge wouldn't do it. I think it was a magistrate, wouldn't go for it. So seemingly everybody was aware of what some of the risks were and what some of the issues were, and nothing was done about it. It was just let's hope something bad doesn't happen. Let's just cross our fingers and hope that this guy, and who, by the way, DeCarlos Brown is just one of, I don't even know what the numbers, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people across the country that would fit a similar bill. Let's just cross our fingers and hope nothing terrible happens. Let's just cross our fingers and hope that the next time he commits a crime, which he had been prone to do, he'd been arrested like 13 times. Let's just cross our fingers and hope the next time it's victimless and that there's no real victim of said crime. In this case, there is a victim. Her name is Irina Zarutska. She didn't have a chance to defend herself. She didn't have the ability to do anything. Sitting with her headphones in on the way home from work on public transportation in Charlotte, and her neck is sliced open. She bleeds out and dies on the light rail. All because soft on crime policies allowed DeCarlos Brown Jr. back onto the streets. So yesterday, there was a report, what was at the time an exclusive from Fox News. This is how the headline reads. Charlotte rail murder suspect linked to inmate release approved under ex-Democrat governor, the GOP alleges. Now, if you are familiar with North Carolina politics, you know who the ex-Democrat governor is. It's everybody's favorite, Roy Cooper, who happens to now be running as a Democrat candidate for the U.S. Senate and is likely going to be that candidate and will face off in the general election against a Republican challenger to become one of two senators from the state of North Carolina. So going through some details in this report that was exclusive yesterday to Fox. I got some other reporting from some Charlotte media, WSOC, and others that we'll get into as well. But the Fox News article reads as follows. As former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper runs for U.S. Senate, the killing of a young woman on the Charlotte light rail train is triggering renewed scrutiny of a prison release deal approved under his administration and whether the accused killer was among those freed. Republican officials are raising urgent questions, asking whether records show DeCarlos Brown Jr., the parolee charged in the fatal stabbing of 23-year-old Irina Zarutska, was tied to a 2021 COVID-era settlement that authorized the release or transition of 3,500 incarcerated individuals. So let me kind of walk back to how we got to this point. According to Joe Bruno over at WSOC Television in Charlotte, he writes in his article, back in the height of COVID, which we all are very well familiar with, we know it well. Back in the height of COVID, the ACLU and the NAACP, both very left-wing activist groups, sued Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, calling for inmates to be released because of the pandemic. Now, let me be clear with this. In the early days of the pandemic, you go back to 2020, latter parts of 2020, even early parts of 2021, there were a lot at the time, as we understood it, some very serious things going on. At the time, there was a lot of uncertainty, there was a lot of questions, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of panic. The whole thing was a disaster. So the ACLU, the NAACP, and all of the left-wing activists and left-wing attorneys that represent those two entities sued the Democrat governor of North Carolina to release people because of the pandemic. These are incarcerated inmates. These are individuals that have stood trial, have been convicted of some level of crime, and have been incarcerated. So that lawsuit happened during the heat of COVID, late 2020, and the parties settled. The ACLU, the NAACP, going after Roy Cooper. They settled, and 3,500 prisoners were granted early release. The list of those 3,500 people were never made public. Oh, you don't say. I don't remember the press release from Governor Roy Cooper's office about all the people that he let out of prison. I don't remember that press release. I don't remember that ever coming to the public light. And you would have to ask yourself, why didn't that happen? Why didn't that list become public? Because it proves that Democrats are in favor of criminals. It backs up the argument. It backs up the claim that Democrats are truly not interested in holding individuals accountable for the things that they do. They are soft on crime. You see it. Don't take my word for it. Look at what's going on across just not only the country, but here in North Carolina. I just laid out. We're all very familiar with the Irina Zarutska murder. We're all very familiar with these soft on crime policies that you see playing out in cities all over the nation. And it's happening in more and more places. Back in November of last year, elections, municipal elections taking place. There is now not a single Republican sitting on the Wilmington City Council. The Wilmington City Council is a 7-0 board, and all 7 members, including the mayor, are registered Democrats. You see the same situation, the same story in places like Asheville, Durham, Raleigh, of course, in Charlotte. This is a growing trend. And because the individuals that are elected to these positions most of the time are far left radicals, far left progressives, we see this same thing playing out. So the list was never made public of the 3,500 people that Roy Cooper released. However, Fox News and Joe Bruno over at WSOC Television have gotten a copy of the list, or at least a partial copy of the list. And in that list, there is an inmate number that is listed as somebody that was released that matches the same inmate number of DeCarlos Brown Jr., listed as an early release February 15th, 2021. And there's on the graphic, it's got painted in red all over it, confidential, non-public information, attorney's eyes only, subject to terms of protective orders. So you've got this list showing that based on the inmate number, which I would say there's a high level of accuracy with, that DeCarlos Brown Jr. was on the list. However, the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections, who is now trying to scramble with these news stories popping up, including the one over at Fox News, says that Brown's placement on the list had nothing to do with when he was released. So follow me through on this. There was a lawsuit by the NAACP and the ACLU. They sued the Democrat governor of North Carolina to release incarcerated, convicted criminals early. The governor and these groups settled and agreed that 3,500 people would be released. That list was never made public. We never knew who these individuals were, what crimes they were charged with, nothing. DeCarlos Brown Jr., the man who is accused and is seen in the video of stabbing and killing Irina Zarutska, is on the list. Yet now the state government, the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections, says that his placement on the list had nothing to do with when he was released. How does that make any sense? Why was his name, why is his name on the list if he wasn't released early? Why was his inmate number placed as part of the 3,500 people as part of this legal settlement if he wasn't released early? The Department of Adult Corrections says that Brown was released on September the 20th, 2020, after completing his mandatory minimum sentencing, and he was put on a post-release supervision, which is pretty typical. On February 6th, 2021, Brown was arrested again. Instead of being sent back to prison on February the 15th, 2021, the hearing officer reinstated his post-release supervision. That settlement agreement was signed 10 days later. Department of Adult Corrections says that the settlement allowed the state to count offenders retroactively, and that is how Brown ended up on the list. Who do you believe? Who do you trust in all of this? I'm going to be bluntly honest with you. I don't believe a damn word coming out of the North Carolina Department of Adult Correction. Now, they might be right, but you're asking me to believe that DeCarlos Brown Jr., who's, again, inmate number, not his name, but his inmate number appears on this list, was not actually released early, but he was retroactively added to the list. It just doesn't make any sense. There's no logic in this in any way, shape, or form. And so you go through this story, you read some of these details about the 3,500 individuals who we had no idea who they were prior to Fox News and WSOC television getting at least partial copies of this list, you start going through the details and you begin to ask yourself, what exactly is going on here? What exactly was the situation that was unfolding in late 2020, early 2021, when some of this legal action and some of these legal proceedings were taking place? And why was this list never made public? Why was that the case? Something just does not seem to be adding up here. Correction officials have told Fox News that the COVID settlement was not signed until February 25th, 2021, 10 days after a hearing. However, because the settlement allowed the state to count eligible offenders retroactively, Brown was included on the settlement-related list, even though neither his release from custody nor his revocation decision was affected by the litigation. Now, this, of course, is painting a very bad picture for Roy Cooper. This is painting a very bad picture for Democrats that continue to be on the side of criminals, continue to promote soft-on-crime policies that make your city, your town, your neighborhood, your community, your schools, your shopping areas, your bars, your restaurants, make all of those things unsafe. Democrats continue to push for it. And so now Cooper is lashing out. A spokesperson for the Cooper campaign told Fox News Digital, quote, "This is a lie. DeCarlos Brown was not released from prison as a result of a court-ordered settlement, but in fact served his full sentence and was not released early. Roy Cooper is the only candidate who spent his career prosecuting violent criminals and keeping thousands of them behind bars as Attorney General, and signing tough on crime laws and stricter pretrial release bail policies as governor." Are you kidding me? I mean, I get it from a campaign perspective. I get it from a PR side that this is what you have to say. But anybody that has even begun to scratch the surface on North Carolina politics knows very clearly that Roy Cooper was not tough on crime. Now, they, of course, use his time. He was the attorney general for like 15 years. So they'll use that as their justification. Oh, look, he's tough on crime. He did his job as the attorney general and prosecuted cases on behalf of the state of North Carolina, a job of which I'll note he was elected to do. But when he was in office, when he was serving, he served 8 years as governor, 2 terms, which is what the limit here, 2 consecutive terms is what our state constitution lays out as the length of a gubernatorial term in North Carolina. He didn't sign tough on crime laws. He didn't make stricter pretrial release bail policies come to fruition. He was actively fighting the General Assembly against this stuff. He was forcing them to do veto overrides to get some of this stuff passed. And so now his campaign and his spokespeople are out and about claiming that Roy Cooper is the champion of public safety, that Roy Cooper stands with the victims, stands with the citizens of communities all over the state of North Carolina that have had to deal with horrific tragedies at the hands of known violent repeat offenders. You're going to have to put a better spin on it than that. Because anybody that has followed any of the inner workings of state government while Roy Cooper was in the governor's mansion, anybody that watched these major battles that were taking place between the Republican-led General Assembly and the governor knows that there is not a shred of truth to that at all, except for the fact that they can claim, well, he prosecuted a bunch of people, which, again, was literally his job as the elected attorney general. Despite the clarification, writes Fox News, Republican leaders said that the lack of a public list and the retroactive nature of the settlement raises unresolved transparency and accountability concerns. Following Zarutska's murder, North Carolina Senate leader Phil Berger said that the records raised serious transparency concerns and demanded access to the prison release list, arguing that voters deserve to know who was freed under policies adopted during Cooper's administration. with the leader of the North Carolina Senate saying, quote, "As governor, Roy Cooper let thousands of criminals out early and hid his actions from the public. DeCarlos Brown Jr., who is now on trial for murder, appeared on the settlement-related list. North Carolinians have a right to know who was released and why." I think that's a fair statement there from Berger. I think that's a fair statement and a fair question that needs to be asked by voters. Hey, I get it. It's a legal settlement. Not all of that stuff is allowed to be public. I'm not oblivious to that point. But hey, you, as the governor, settled with the ACLU and the NAACP. You settled with them. Your administration settled with them. You released all these people. Who are they? Did any of them go on to commit horrific, violent acts on innocent civilians? We know at least one who appears on the list. There's no argument over that. The Department of Adult Corrections and the Cooper campaign want to play semantics over whether he was retroactively added to the list or not. The reality is his number's on there and nobody is disputing that. Who did you release? What were they incarcerated for in the first place? Have they committed crimes since? We have no idea. And I would argue, as a voter in North Carolina, that is important information to know. That is something that we should have access to as voters, as many of us will be heading to the ballot box later this year and likely determining if we're going to vote for Roy Cooper or not. This would be relevant information to have. Michael Whatley, who is the Republican frontrunner on the GOP side of that Senate campaign, said, quote, "Roy Cooper released repeat offender DeCarlos Brown Jr. from prison, who went on to brutally murder Irina Zarutska aboard the Charlotte Light Rail this past summer. Cooper lied. He said that 3,500 inmates he released from prison weren't violent. Then he tried to hide the truth from the public." Again, another accurate statement. He goes on to say, Cooper is responsible for the death of Irina Zarutska. He is a pro-criminal, anti-victim politician who will do anything to appease the radical left, even if it means putting North Carolinians at risk and our communities in danger. He has disqualified himself from serving in public office. Mark Harris, another Republican here in North Carolina, member of Congress, said North Carolina's pro-crime Democrats have a shameful history of prioritizing criminals over victims through radical policies like former Governor Roy Cooper's DEI reforms and cashless bail that freed dangerous repeat offenders. Another accurate statement. And so this it leads to this road. And it's pretty shocking, to be honest with you, that this is even a major national discussion. But we have seen the soft on crime stuff play out. We've seen it here in North Carolina. We've seen it all over the left coast. We've seen it up in New York and in portions of the Northeast. We know how this stuff plays out. It's not a mystery at this point. It's not an experiment that has been tried that we don't have the data back to prove whether it was successful or not. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll contend to you, the evidence is pretty darn clear. It's pretty clear at this point. These policies are detrimental. These policies are bad. These policies put innocent, law-abiding citizens, productive, useful members of society, it puts them in an unsafe, unwinnable situation. And for what? So that Democrats can get applause and they can get pats on the back from these radical left-wing social justice, anti-law enforcement, anti-jail wackos on the left. That's all this is about. It is being in the good graces of some of the most radically minded individuals in the Democrat Party. And I will contend to you this morning that that is a really miserable position to be in. That is something that should not be playing out. But here it is, right in front of our own eyes, right here in our backyard in North Carolina, happening just a couple of hours down the road in Charlotte. And it's, that's not the first time it's happened. It happens all over the state, happens all over the country in areas in which Democrats have, in most cases, almost exclusive control. Fortunately, here in New Hanover County, we've got a stopgap with the county commission, which thankfully still has a Republican majority, which I'll note is at risk this year. Leanne Pierce, who is the chairwoman of our New Hanover County Board of Commissioners, is running for re-election. We have got to get her reelected. We have got to keep that Republican majority. Because if we lose the county commission, as I mentioned, city council's already gone. If we lose the county commission, Wilmington is screwed. New Hanover County is screwed. You thought the stuff was bad in Charlotte. You thought it was bad in Durham and Asheville and Raleigh. That is coming to New Hanover County. That is coming to the city of Wilmington if the county commission flips from a 3-2 Republican majority to a 3-2 Democrat majority. I can absolutely guarantee you that is the case. That is something we absolutely have to be mindful of. Fortunately for Commissioner Pierce, there is no primary election for her. There's only 2 candidates running, her and Richard Collier, who ran for city council. So you'll see her play out in the general election, and we've got to make sure we get behind her. We've got to make sure we get behind her and Richard. Because, again, I can promise you, and I don't make many promises in politics, but I can promise you, if the county commission falls and gets back in the hands and the control of the Democrats, start looking for property in Pender, Brunswick County, because it's not going to be fun. Your taxes are going to go up through the roof, which, of course, is already a problem in itself. The quality of service that you get is going to plummet, and you will see these ridiculously stupid, ridiculously dangerous policies start creeping in here to southeastern North Carolina. We cannot allow that to take place. We've got to keep that Republican majority on the county commission that can hold the city council accountable. We'll get into more of this coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to thank the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. When legal challenges arise, put your trust in the Law Group. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense. If so, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. And when you visit their website, lawgroupnc.com, they've got a great blog where they go through and Melissa Gott and the team discuss a variety of different legal challenges and matters that you might be dealing with. A lot of very useful, very great information over on their website, lawgroupnc.com. So if you have any legal questions, any legal problems, reach out to them, lawgroupnc.com or 910-251-6088. Again, lawgroupnc.com or give them a call, 910-251-6088. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate Melissa and the team's continued financial support, I should say, here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. We'll get to some of your comments coming up as well. Plus, we'll round out this story from Fox News about how DeCarlos Brown Jr., whose name is on the list of people who was released early, was not actually released early. And surprise, surprise, it's not the Democrats' fault. It's not Roy Cooper's fault in any way, shape, or form. We'll get into those details coming up here in just a couple of minutes as the Nick Craig Show rolls on a Thursday morning, streaming live on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. The show's also available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Thursday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Don't forget that you can get access to daily show notes and more by supporting the show over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. You get access to bonus content, our daily show notes, and our monthly hangout. All of that is available for as little as literally a cup of coffee a month. Patreon.com/Nick Craig. Thanks to all of our great patrons. And we look forward to catching up later on this month in our exclusive Patreon monthly hangout. You can also find the link over at nickcraig.com. So we're talking about this, a couple of different articles, one from Fox News, who broke the story first yesterday morning, and then some follow-up reporting from Joe Bruno, who is a phenomenal investigative reporter. He works for WSOC Television in Charlotte, about DeCarlos Brown Jr., a settlement between the ACLU and the NAACP going back to 2020, 2021 during COVID, in which Roy Cooper, who was the governor at the time and was being sued by these left-wing organizations, decided it was a good idea to release 3,500 incarcerated prisoners and grant them early release. And now, according to the statement from Roy Cooper to Fox News yesterday, Cooper is hard on crime. He's tough on crime. He's not going to allow dangerous, violent criminals to roam the streets. He's not going to allow individuals who should be behind prison bars, should be incarcerated. He's not going to allow them to roam free. That's what he's telling the media. That's what he's saying. Meanwhile, his actions would prove that this is a very different situation. And this is something that the Democrat Party is dealing with all over the country right now. Yes, of course, we're focusing on what's going on here in North Carolina, the DeCarlos Brown Jr., the Irina Zarutska situation, which gained so much national and even international attention. But this conversation could be zoomed out and placed in cities all across the U.S., folks. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the show. We have already seen this experiment played out. This is not some unsolved science experiment. Democrats, for years now, have been pushing these incredibly stupid and dangerous cashless bail. We're no longer going to hold criminals accountable for anything policies. We've seen it in New York. We've seen it in California. We've seen it in Washington State. This stuff doesn't work. It just doesn't. There is no evidence that I have seen, that I have been able to find, to back up that these policies are good for the communities in which they're implemented. And of course they're not. I mean, you don't need to have a PhD in the criminal justice system to wrap your head around the concept of when you don't hold violent criminals or criminals in general responsible for their actions, that doesn't make a situation better, right? You see it with the policies in some of these places as it relates to shoplifting, which in most cases is not a violent crime. I'm not excusing it, but it's not a violent crime. What has happened in places like San Francisco, which is always my favorite example, with these policies? I've covered this extensively. What has happened in San Francisco? You have seen some businesses that have been on the streets in downtown, in the heart of San Francisco, for decades. You are seeing them closing up shop, turning the sign from open to close and putting the building up for sale. Why is that the case? Because it no longer makes sense to operate a retail business in a place where individuals are allowed to steal from you and there is nothing that you can do. And that's exactly what happens. Law enforcement won't respond unless you steal. I don't remember what the number is in California. It's like $800 or $900. But if you're walking into a store and you just take a couple of things and walk right out, there's nothing that can be done. Yeah, if you're the clerk, you can call the police. Guess what? They're not going to respond. And if they do, they're not going to charge anybody. And if you work at these stores, you're not allowed to do anything, as you shouldn't, or no reason to put your life at risk for somebody that is breaking the law, but it seemingly is allowed. So it's created a situation where businesses now say, yeah, I guess really no point of operating this business anymore. No point of operating this retail store anymore. And then what's the other alternative? You've seen that too. Go on Twitter, go on Facebook, go on Instagram, where you've got entire stores in cities like San Francisco where everything, and I mean, ladies and gentlemen, everything is behind lock and key. You can't take a $1 item off the shelf without a store clerk coming over and opening and unlocking a little plexiglass covering over it. That's the alternative, where it is now so inconvenient to shop at these places that people just say, to hell with it. Just buy it on Amazon. Buy it somewhere else. I'm not going to hover around a store aisle for 15 minutes waiting for the one person that's working to come over and unlock this so I can buy a tube of toothpaste. So I can purchase a 99-cent frozen pizza from CVS. That is another item that is behind lock and key. The entire freezer section is locked. Hey, yes, I'd like to purchase a less than $1 frozen pizza. Yeah, sure. Stand over in the corner there, wait 10 minutes till somebody's available to unlock it so that you can take your 99-cent pizza and throw it in the oven. It's ridiculous. It's completely absurd. And it is a growing, I believe, a growing issue that the Democrat Party has to face. It is a growing issue that I'm not sure they have the answer for, because it's once again a rock and a hard place for them. If they claim that they're tough on crime, which Roy Cooper is trying to do, you tick off and alienate all of the social justice crowd that believes that these policies are a good idea. And why is that relevant? You might say, Nick, who cares? No, it's incredibly relevant because this group is very active. These far left progressives, the ones that you've seen on the streets now for the last year, protesting this administration, calling Donald Trump a fascist, calling ICE the Gestapo, claiming that this administration is completely eroding the United States of America, is destroying the democracy. Those are the individuals that show up and vote. Those are the individuals that donate their time and knock on doors. Those are the individuals that donate money to campaigns like the one that Roy Cooper needs to run. So he's in a miserable position of his own accord, I will note. I don't have any sympathy for him by any stretch of the imagination. But he is in this miserable position where the vast majority of the American people want criminals to be held accountable. Regardless of what the crime is, they want criminals to be held to account because guess what? Most people are law-abiding citizens. Most people don't actively break the law, or they don't try to actively break the law. We don't walk into a store and shoplift. We just don't. We go in, get our items, put them in our cart, put them in our basket, pay for it, and go home. Do what we need to do. We don't break the law. So when we find out and we hear that people are in fact doing that, we want them held to account. I'm not saying somebody shoplifts, you lock them in prison, throw away the key, and they rot there for the rest of their lives. That's not what I'm saying. But that's what the American people want. Meanwhile, the far left sides of the Democrat Party, it finds that to be completely objectionable. They find that to be oppressive. They find that to be overburdensome beyond belief. So it leads you to this situation where you, as a Democrat candidate, somebody like Roy Cooper, has a very, very narrow line that he has to walk, a tightrope that is incredibly thin. You saw this with the Biden administration. You saw this with Kamala Harris. You've seen this at all different levels of government. And it's not a large group, but it is the vocal minority of the Democrat Party that is very engaged, very active, that Democrat candidates like Roy Cooper and others have to appease. They cannot afford to lose that base. They cannot afford to have those people not volunteer for their campaigns. They cannot afford to have those individuals not show up and vote for them in primaries, of which Roy Cooper has. It's not a serious primary, but there's like five other candidates running against him. He needs those people to show up and support him. These policies are an unmitigated disaster. They're dangerous and they're damaging for any community in which they are enacted. And they need to be stopped. And the only way to do that, ladies and gentlemen, is through the ballot box. And that's really what this boils down to. If you find this stuff reprehensible, if you find this stuff beyond the pale, I mean, yeah, posting on social media is great, but you got to get your ass up off the couch and go do something. You got to volunteer. You got to get involved. You got to help these candidates. I mentioned earlier, Leanne Pierce. She's currently the chairwoman of the county commission. She's running for re-election this year. We've got to get out and make sure that she gets elected. If the county commission falls, we are so totally screwed here in New Hanover County. You thought it was bad now. It's going to get 1,000 times worse. Can't allow it to happen. We've got to do more than just post about it on social media. Got to do more than just complain about it. Got to get out. Time, treasure, or talent. What are you willing to give? If you don't have the financial means, all right. Then get out there, get in touch with various campaigns and make it happen. Knock doors. Work the polls, early voting, election day. Got to do something. This is what we are staring down the barrel at. And again, I can promise you, this stuff is coming to Wilmington. This stuff is coming to New Hanover County. The new city council has now they've only been in there about a month or so, 2 months maybe. And so you haven't really seen these wacko progressive policies play out yet. It's only a matter of time. The new members are still trying to find their footing. All of them are first-time elected officials. So there's a learning curve with it, but it won't be long before you see these kinds of discussions and these kind of arguments taking place. A couple of comments coming in on our Rumble live chat. Of course, the ACLU and NAACP who initiated the releases have zero consequences, and they probably have no guilt about it either. I think you're 100% right. Of course, they don't have any guilt. They don't care. These bleeding heart liberals that preach all of this compassion and caring, it's a bunch of BS. They don't believe any of that. They don't care what the results of these actions are. They don't care if there's consequences for this stuff. As long as they can, for the ACLU and the NAACP, as long as they can go to their donor network and say, hey, we settled with the Cooper administration. We got 3,500 prisoners released. Write us a check. Open your pocketbook up and write us a big fat check for all the great work that we're doing, protecting this, that, or the other. That's all their objective is. That's all their goal is. These are businesses. Now, they're nonprofits by their technical registration and status, but they're businesses. They're in the business of raising money and pushing their left-wing agenda and left-wing narrative. They just don't care. Another interesting comment. If bartenders can be held accountable for drunk drivers, then judges should be held accountable for releasing criminals. Well, fortunately, that is now the reality here in North Carolina. Arenas law, which had to be passed by the North Carolina General Assembly, does in fact hold magistrates and judges accountable. If they are now legally required to, by state law, which I think this part of it only went into effect January 1, so it's still relatively new. If a magistrate releases somebody and does not look at their full criminal background, does not look at the entirety of this person's multiple, if they fit this bill, if they've had multiple run-ins with law enforcement, and allows this criminal back out on the streets, there are now penalties, including removal of office. These judges now can have their livelihoods, and I'm not a fan of life ruination, but these individuals can now be stripped of their duties. The process is now enshrined in state law to make this stuff a reality. And you might say, no, well, Nick, that's, overburdensome. That's unfair. Sure, maybe in some cases it is, but guess what? If you're going to allow a dangerous criminal back out on the streets, if you're going to allow innocent people, innocent law-abiding, tax-paying citizens to become the victims of crimes that were completely preventable, somebody's got to be held to account. And if it's a magistrate that is allowing that dangerous repeat offender back out on the streets, then it needs to be their head. That's the only way that this works. And it's unfortunate that it has to play out like this. You would assume a magistrate or a judge would look at the entirety of somebody's criminal background and say, maybe this person shouldn't be out on the streets. This individual has been arrested 47 times. Maybe it's time that we finally do something, but they haven't. That is why the North Carolina General Assembly, thank God, is currently held by Republicans and was able to get Arenas law passed, was able to make this a reality to the objection of Democrats that didn't want it. There was like 2 Democrats that voted for this. One of them is a Mecklenburg County Democrat in Carla Cunningham. And she voted for it because she's sick of this crap in her city as well. She's sick of her constituents falling prey to crimes that are completely avoidable and preventable. So the accountability is coming. It's unfortunate that we had to do it this way, but it's here. The accountability is now coming into reality. And it's about freaking time. I'm sick of talking about this. I've been talking about it now since I started in radio full time here in 2021. Early 2021 is when I jumped on the air here in Wilmington. I'm sick of talking about this stuff. It's been 5 freaking years now, and I sound like a broken record. But it continues. It's not changing. It's not going anywhere. Completely preventable, completely avoidable. We'll keep an eye on this interesting story. I'll have all the links over on our show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. Well, that's going to do it for a Thursday edition of the Nick Craig Show. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support as the Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. It can also be heard weeknights 9 p.m. on Charlotte's FM News Talk 107.9 WBT. We'll do it again tomorrow on a Friday edition. Have a great day.